The target was a Shia neighborhood of Baghdad, but the victims of the Iraqi capital's worst suicide attack since the U.S.-led invasion of 2003 were also Sunni and Christian. They were men and women and children. We'll never know for sure if the attack claimed by ISIS could have been prevented, but the anger directed towards the Prime Minister when he visited the scene on Sunday highlights the rage of citizens who feel the political will to protect them just isn't there. Case in point, it took the killing of more than 200 for authorities to finally ban explosive detectors, which we knew for a long while had turned out to be phonies. What accountability for Iraq's leaders? How to get them to truly all band together in the fight against an Islamic State organization whose rise can be in part traced to the ostracizing of Sunnis after the fall of Saddam Hussein. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at grief and anger in Baghdad. With us, her previous postings included Baghdad. New York Times Paris bureau chief Elisa Rubin, welcome back to the show. From Tunis, academic Zaid al-Ali, the author of The Struggle for Iraq's Future. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
From Abu Dhabi, Faisal al-Yafai, chief columnist for The National. Always a pleasure, Faisal.
Thank you.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter. Our hashtag F24debate. Istanbul Airport, the capital of Bangladesh, Dhaka. It's been a bloody final week of Ramadan, particularly grisly, though, the attack that took place Saturday overnight in the central Karada neighborhood of Baghdad. Luke Shrego has more.
Iraqis work to clear the ruins from a shattered Baghdad street, a day after an Islamic State group's suicide bombing left hundreds both dead and wounded.
May God punish those who are responsible for such a bombing. So many people are still under the debris. The rescue crews couldn't exhume them so far.
It was the deadliest attack of the year by far, and one of the worst in a decade of conflict, with city streets full of people marking the end of the day's Ramadan fasting. Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi visited the site in the hours after the attack. He announced moves to improve security, including upgrades to equipment and increased scanning and intelligence, but the furious crowd was having none of it.
I swear to God, this government's a failure. All the departments of this government are failures. They're the ones who brought terrorism here. Some of them are complicit with those who did this.
There's been a recent uptick in such attacks on the population from the Islamic State group, linked by both Iraqi and foreign officials to the extremists' losses on the battlefield over the past year.
All right, before we talk about the anger expressed by the woman in that report, Elisa Rubin, Karada, a neighborhood in the heart of Baghdad near the protected green zone, where the bombs went off on a nearly daily basis after the fall of Saddam Hussein.
It's always been a rather targeted neighborhood. It is Shia to some extent, but it's also the home of many Sunnis. Certainly many Sunni merchants are there, and it's always been a Christian a place where Christians felt safe and where a lot of Christians lived. There are some Christian churches still in the area. It's also where we have the New York Times bureau is not that far away. So it's a place I certainly am very familiar with, and it has often been a target because it's a place where people are all on the street. So it makes for a destination for suicide bombers, not unlike Sadr City or some of the other areas with large street markets.
Yeah, we heard the Iraqi ambassador to France, and I'll put it to you, Zaid al-Ali. He was talking about the fact that this was a place people were going to Saturday night to Sunday, A, because of Ramadan, B, because it's the end of the school year, and C, because people had come out to watch the football. It's tragic to see so many children among the victims.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why the Islamic State targets this type of areas, to maximize the number of victims, to maximize the amount of pain, and also to maximize the amount of suffering. But one of the other reasons why they target this area is because they know that it's a soft target, and because the government doesn't do anywhere near an adequate job of keeping people safe. The continual use of the fake bomb detectors that you referred to earlier sends a very strong signal to the Islamic State and to its members that Baghdad does not take security seriously, that they don't take the security of its ordinary citizens, people, children, young people going out on a Saturday night just to have fun or to relax or to forget their ordinary troubles. The government does not take those people's security seriously for a very obvious reason, because Iraqi politicians do not live in Karada, they don't frequent it very often, and their family members often live abroad. So, they find it very difficult to care about what happens in those areas, as can be seen by the fact that those bomb detectors have been used now for years after it was known that they were fraudulent.
Let's talk about those bomb detectors. The British businessman who sold them went to jail back in 2013 for peddling what turned out to be useless devices modeled on golf ball finders. James McCormick believed to have sold some 6,000 fake detectors for as much as £27,000 each, according to the Daily Telegraph. The UN, among his customers, Zaid al-Ali, 2013 he went to jail. Why did they still have them? Why do they still have them?
Well, for different reasons, right? So, first of all, to properly answer that question, one would have to read the minds of senior Iraqi politicians, including the former prime minister. So I can't tell you exactly why they still have them, but I can speculate. So on a few months after Jim McCormick was sent to prison in England, where he was given the maximum penalty for fraud, which is 10 years, there was a terrible day in Baghdad where, incidentally, Karada was also targeted and more than 100 people were killed. And on that day where all these explosions took place, the former Prime Minister, Nouri al-Maliki, gave a press conference in which he was asked about these bomb detectors. The first journalist to bring a question to the Prime Minister said, well, you keep talking about security, you keep talking about how the government has everything under control, and yet you still use these fraudulent bomb detectors that everyone knows is fraudulent. How can you justify this? And the Prime Minister came out in front of everyone, the former Prime Minister, and invented this story about how the reason why Jim McCormick was sent to jail was because they were overpriced, that the devices were overpriced, and that in fact the devices worked 40% of the time, which was out and out completely untrue. So why did the Prime Minister make that up? I don't know. Either there's an expression in Iraq, they say he either doesn't know, in which case that's very problematic, or if he did know, then it's even more problematic. So which of those two options is true, I don't know, but in any event, it's very, very bad. Now, and the separate question is, why did al-Abadi not withdraw them? And that speaks to many issues. One is that he doesn't properly control the security forces. Second, because he doesn't want to implicate his party colleagues, because him and Nouri al-Maliki are in the same political party, and doesn't want to implicate him necessarily in incompetence or corruption, etc., etc. And thirdly, because, once again, because he doesn't feel directly involved, because him and his family members never frequent these areas. They all live either in the Green Zone or in London. So, they don't really feel that it's their problem. That's at least my interpretation. They would say differently if they were here, of course.
Let's bring in Abbas Qadim of the Institute of Shia Studies, who joins us from Alexandria, Virginia, just outside of Washington. Do you agree with what Zaid al-Ali just said about why these fake detectors were still kept until today?
Thank you for having me. In addition to being the president of the Institute of Shia Studies, I'm also a senior foreign policy fellow at Johns Hopkins, the Foreign Policy Institute at Johns Hopkins University. Why they were used in the first place? Again, there is, as Zaid said, it's a lot of corruption involved, and that's what it is. It's criminal negligence by the government officials who brought them. Why they are still used, it's the same reason, corruption. Not using them will bring the questions, why did they use them in the first place? So it's pretty much, it's summed up in 3 words, corruption, or 4 words, corruption and cover-up.
At the outset of our show, we heard a report in which one resident of a building that caught fire because of the explosion in Baghdad said that the government is a failure. All the departments of the government are a failure. They're ones who brought terrorism here. Some of them are complicit. She's saying they're complicit. Does she have a point in the fact that security wasn't beefed up?
Well, let's remember that everywhere in the world, when there is a government failure, people come out and blame the government for everything. They even blame them for, more than just negligence and failure. So that's a natural phenomenon, natural reaction. But in the case of Iraq, definitely the government is not doing what it is supposed to do. A lot of the government failure is because of the nature of the structure of the Iraqi government. Let's face it, that Iraqi government is a consociation of many groups. Many people in government with high positions are one foot in the government and another foot in with the terrorists. That's a truth, and it's well known. So that's another part. Security was not beefed up again because Baghdad is full of holes. I mean, you talk about clearing Fallujah and taking Fallujah back from the terrorists, which is a great thing. We all celebrate it. But let's remember that there are certain areas in Baghdad that are more nasty or nastier than Fallujah in terms of being incubators of terrorist sympathizers and terrorists, to be frank. The government cannot really, because of the mechanism of running politics in Iraq nowadays, it cannot even approach these areas, because the moment you move against certain areas that are basically Sunni dominant areas, then it will be accused of sectarianism, and that's a big problem. So
well, let me bring in on this point Faisal Al-Yafai. Faisal, you heard the argument there that yes, there is corruption, but to a certain degree, the way Iraq is set up, the government's hands are partially tied.
Well, partially tied might be overstating or understating the degree of government involvement. As Lisa Rubin put it at the very beginning, this is not really an attack on a Shia neighborhood, even though it is sometimes called that in the media. This was an attack on Iraqis. This was an attack on ordinary civilians going about their daily life. And when you pass the anger, when you pass the comments of people who were there on the scene, people who suffered from the bombings, you note that what the anger is directed at is not merely the government, but the fact that they don't feel that the government is listening to their concerns. And this goes to the point that Zaid is making, and has actually, I mean, I remember listening to Zaid make the points about these Gulf detector, these Gulf finder bomb detectors perhaps a year and a half ago. He's been talking about it for a very long time, doing excellent reporting on it, and nobody in the government is listening. And the reason they are not listening is because what difference does it make from their perspective? As Abbas points out, Iraq, and Baghdad in particular, is split between lots of different areas. And if you are in one particular area, or you're in a different particular area where the government does not exist, it doesn't make much sense to say, well, there are security checkpoints, well, the green zone is fortified. It has to be an entirety of fortification across the city, across the capital. It cannot simply be that some parts are fortified and others are not. Now, the people on the ground know this very well, and that is why you see the anger directed at the politicians, because they realize that as long as it doesn't affect the green zone, as long as it doesn't affect the people who are making the laws, nothing is a problem for the politicians.
Lisa Rubin, it'd be unrealistic to expect with a magic wand the government to stop all ISIS attacks throughout the country in one fell swoop. But there is the sense, listening to this conversation, that it wouldn't take much for at least the government to appear to be more implicated than it's been.
Well, I think the government is right now probably at its weakest it's been weak for a long time. It's been filled with troubles for a long time. But Mr. Abadi has had great difficulty managing even to put together his cabinet. It's very hard to direct the Interior Ministry, for instance, to change what it's using to detect bombs in Baghdad if you don't really have control, as one of the people said, of the Interior Ministry. So I think it is true that the government should be able to do better, but overall, Iraq has had a crisis of leadership. And that if you look, whether you look at the Shia community or the Sunni community, There are many subdivisions of it. They're in competition. There's the feeling that if one gets the upper hand, the other one will lose. And that makes it very difficult for anyone to bring it together. Saddam did it for a while at a tremendous price that nobody thought was acceptable. The problem was that once he was gone, then everyone wanted to be sure they got the biggest share, and that rather than looking at sort of the big picture for Iraq. Now, but all that said, there's no question that ordinary people, as one person said, these are soft targets, and they have never been accorded the kind of concern and care that lots of wealthier people are able to manage to afford.
Zaid al-Ali, is there any way for the government to quickly at least show that it's more implicated than it's been?
I mean, there are lots of ways there are lots of things and initiatives that the government could take to give the impression that it's improving security, and also to actually bring about some moderate improvements to security. So one would, of course, to immediately withdraw the bomb detectors. Now, of course, the Prime Minister has said that he will withdraw them. We're waiting to see whether or not that order will actually be applied now. And also, there's plans apparently that have been on the books now for a while to use more sniffer dogs and to beef up security at the entry points to Baghdad and so on and so forth. Another initiative that they could start using right away is to stop torturing all the detainees that are brought into Iraqi prisons, which is something that happens as a matter of course in all Iraqi detention centers, regardless of the race or religion of the person who's arrested. Those are things that could be done immediately. However, even if those things are done, I have very, very little confidence that will lead to an improvement in the long term, or a sustainable improvement to Iraq's political arrangements or to the Iraqi state's foundations.
And do you take Faisal Al-Yafai and Abbas Kadim's point that the Prime Minister's power is very, very limited?
Yeah, there's no question that it's limited, and for the reasons that Abbas and others have pointed out already. Now, what would need to happen in order for that to change is, the different options are something that people have been floating for a while, which is coup d'etat, which is completely unacceptable and out of the question. A revolution is completely unacceptable and unlikely to take place either. The only other option that exists at this stage is to replace the political class through some type of democratic initiative, which would be new elections. But if you were to organize new elections on the basis of the same laws, then you'll get the same result. So in order to get a different political class, better quality political class, better quality politicians who care more about the lives of ordinary people, you would need to change the electoral law. And the only people that can do that is the current political class. So basically you can see that there's a huge dilemma about the various options that we have before us as Iraqis.
All right, we're going to pick up on those points when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.